Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about preparing for leadership before the opportunity arises. And if you listen to the show, we just talked about a very similar topic, but more along the lines of transitioning into leadership. But what if you have a plan or a master plan where you know there's a next level or multiple levels throughout your career? How do you prepare to set yourself up for those opportunities? And that's where we're going to go. Dustin, lead us off.
So one of the things I think is important as people are maybe wanting to rise into leadership and lead other people and things like that, oftentimes once they are given that opportunity, that's when they start thinking about, okay, what do I need to do now to be a leader? And instead, how do you increase your chances, frankly, of becoming a leader? One, start the behaviors of leadership before the opportunity arises. I feel like there's a few kind of critical things that people can think about. And I'm thinking about this through a lens of, any leader out there where, you have maybe these high potential people that you think they have this opportunity to do it. What would be things that we should tell them now to say, like, look, I know there isn't the opportunity today, but I see potential in you. I see this huge opportunity for you. What can you start doing now? And so when I think about kind of two things that I think can really help anyone as they're preparing to have the opportunity later, beyond just start doing the behavior now. One is, as we talked about in our previous episode, as a new leader, the number one thing you have to do is you have to get buy-in, right? And the way you get buy-in is you build trust, you build relationships, right? You listen, you learn. And none of that has to happen as a leader, right? I mean, we see it in organizations all the time, right? You can be a leader, you can be a manager, or you can be both, right? And, a manager just means that you're there to manage people. A leader, means that people are actually there to follow. And a leader and manager means you're doing both. And I think a lot of times we think that you have to have both in order to be one or the other. When in reality, we know that not to be true. We see people rise to be leaders, right? We call them informal leaders a lot of times in corporate culture, right? They're an informal leader, meaning everybody kind of follows them, but they're not managing anyone, right? Well, guess what? Who are the most likely people that are going to be tapped on the shoulder to say, hey, would you like to lead a bigger team? It's the people that already have that informal leadership, right? And have shown some of that skill set, some of that behavior. And so what are you doing today to just listen to other people, build relationships, build trust, ask questions, have and then which really leads into the second thing, which is how to build a broader perspective. Because what is always the case as you become into a new leader is you come with some limited set of perspective. And the reality is that never changes, right? In life, your perspective is always changing. You're constantly learning. But I think about even, younger in my career, I was fortunate enough to be in this group. I worked for a bank in college, and it was this young leaders group. And I remember the CEO coming in and really talking about this. And there were basically two things that he coached us to do. One was read books constantly, right? And don't read them to read them. A lot of people will put a badge of honor and say, hey, I read 50 books. It was more about read them to take something and implement something. And then the second one was actually get there early. And it wasn't get there early just to say I got there early. His point was actually get there early and then talk to other people that have a different role than you and a different perspective and just ask questions. Because his point was it's not just about getting there early just to be there early, but that is, if you get there early, one, you're getting there early with other people that get there early. And two, people tend to just be more open to answering those questions, right? And having more dialogue on it versus if you're in the middle of the day and you go to people and be like, hey, so what's going on in your world? And, what's good in your division and what's unique in your job, right? It can feel frankly like a waste of time. It can feel like you're just a water cooler talker. And I always thought that was such good advice because, I think in today's world, more hybrid environment, I actually think it's a little bit harder. I do think people are more willing if you set time. I think it doesn't always have to be early, but I also think about if you really want to aspire to leadership, right, and to leading teams and have greater impact, I still don't think getting in early ever hurts because people see that. As we talked about, right, this can also model that behavior, and it gives you that free space to start building those relationships when the fires haven't already started.
That's really good. I've got a couple on my list that are going to overlap that as well. I think a couple things to me are just behaviors, basic behaviors that you want to start building. And by the way, these are things that you're always going to work on because nobody's perfect. But one is time management. And, if whether you're in the marketing business, you're in sales, you're in insert any industry here, I want to see someone who does a good job of managing their calendar. And that could be adding blocks of focus time, adding blocks of time for projects, dedicating specific time for research or learning. There's a lot of things that can go into that. And then, also seeing that, maybe like you said, you're coming early, you're staying late. It doesn't have to be every day, but if someone is really dedicated, it'll be on their calendar if it's important to them. The next one is asking questions. I tend to find people who are the most engaged ask the most questions. They're curious. And people who are curious tend to be learners. They tend to read books, like you said, which is also key. So if I see a stack of leadership books or business books in someone's office, that's typically an inclination that they're making an effort after hours to improve, to get better, to learn, whether they have an appetite for leadership or not. The other one is offering to take on more. If you want more responsibility, I love people who are like, hey, what else can I do? Or I've got some free time. I want to be able to take this on. Those are going to be the first people I will consider for promotion because they're trying to help the team and try to help the betterment of the company, even if it doesn't necessarily fall directly within their job description. I think huge bonus points right there. Also, if you're newer to the company, make it clear what you want, not only from the time of a job interview, but from quarterly reports, annual reports. What is it that you're after? What do you want? And I think it's also important to talk about the personal stuff as much as the business stuff. So if you've got a big personal goal, retire by 55 or buy a cottage, or maybe it's get your MBA, those things should be important because I know those people who have these big goals, they want more. They want to be challenged and they want to work their way up promotion to promotion. So that's important to me personally. Ask what else you can do. So I mentioned before, take on more, but sometimes you have to ask, is there something I can help with? Do you want help with that? Again, these people are taking and making an initiative. They want it to be known that, they are team players. And that could be coaching someone. That could be sitting in to help someone navigate just a difficult situation, personally, professionally, emotionally, whatever it might be. And then, like you said, and I'm just going to repeat it because it is important, but whether we're talking about coaching sports, like making a state team, or we're talking about getting a promotion, are you going to consider the guy or gal who spends an extra 90 minutes a week at work? Or are you going to promote the person who spends maybe a little less than 40 hours a week at work? To me, that adds up, especially if your body of work over the course of 3 years or 5 years suggests that, Susie's putting in on average 7 or 8 hours more per month than Johnny. That carries a lot of weight, in my opinion.
You bet. And I think there's almost two angles of this. There's how do you prepare yourself, right? And then how do you increase your likelihood, right?
Great question.
And I think, gaining perspective, building, getting buy-in, building relationships, that helps you get prepared. But to your point, like, if you think about the two easiest ways to get promoted, like it's so simple, it's crazy, right? What do we all say as business leaders? Who do we who is always the person that gets promoted? It's the one that is the outlier. They outperform in their day-to-day everyone else. That's always the first person you look at, right? Like, and having these other things, I think, is the next piece. But you have to start there. And I think sometimes people want to skip over that. I mean, what's interesting is you look at like, what is the number one challenge businesses have when they move leaders into leadership roles is they advance somebody into a leadership role because they were a really good individual contributor, but they don't actually have the skill set of a leader, right? And the point being is not every really good individual contributor wants to or should be a leader of other people, right? Like, and that's not a bad thing, right? Like, I think a lot of times people just think, well, the only way for me to create more value and to grow my career and things like that is to get to that level. And in some industries, that's probably true, but in so many, I mean, honestly, individual contributors sometimes can have much simpler lives and much greater outcomes, right? But it's when you really want to make more impact is really when you want to go. And the cheat code I always say is like, look, if I'm ever looking that, hey, who are we looking to advance? And well, number one, it's who is the outlier at doing their job really, really well, right? Because that, the proof is in the pudding. And then two, you said it, it's genuine curiosity, right? And that shows itself in asking questions. It shows itself in, kind of, hey, can I help out here? Or can I come along for that or whatever? If somebody nails those two things, it's almost automatic, I feel like, in businesses, right? But what I think a lot of times individuals fall into the trap is they kind of get allured into call it the fun stuff, which is the genuine curiosity, meeting with people, asking questions and all that. And that's super helpful. And it's a really important thing to do. But I've seen it at least a number of times where someone has, to your point, they've stated, hey, I want to be a leader. And so they start wanting to get involved in all these other things. But then you're like, okay, but you're not actually doing your day-to-day job well. and so that's what's the biggest proof that you can do another job really well is prove that the job that you have today, you can do really, really well. And again, it's the simplest way. And so if you kind of think through, how do I prepare myself? But then also, if that's my desire, how do I increase my likelihood?
What's up, listeners? I just wanted to say thank you for being a part of the Hustle Nation community. We are absolutely thrilled and honored that you listen to our show. I wanted to take a break to share a special resource with you. I'm talking about our 2020 Vision Guide. This is a pivotal tool we use in our workshops where participants typically invest thousands of dollars for transformative experiences. Imagine having a crystal clear, actionable roadmap to not just meet but exceed your personal and professional goals. That's the power of the 2020 Vision Guide. And here's the best part. We're offering it to you for free. This is your chance to leverage a tool that has propelled hundreds of people achieve unparalleled success. Visit our website now. I'm including the URL in the show notes below, where you can download our guide and start your journey toward clarity and achievement. Don't wait. It's time to create the life you deserve today. Now back to the show. That's a good point. It kind of takes me back to someone said once, make yourself irreplaceable. And you don't have to necessarily be irreplaceable, but you can make it look like you're irreplaceable, because people will say like, no one works as hard as Dustin, or, no one has the passion for X that Dustin has. And those are things that people kind of hold on to and say like, oh, geez, like he's the one we should be considering for this role. But I'm going to go another step deeper, and I'm going to step into something that I think gets overlooked a lot, but I think is where it starts. It's the foundation. I'm going to use myself as an example. So years ago, I had some pretty significant health issues, and kind of posed as a situation. Obviously, it felt more dire than it was. And I just finally said to myself, I need to invest in myself. I need to make my health a priority, because when you're young, even in your 30s, you feel like, your body hasn't caught up with you. And, most of us don't have back pain and neck pain, and doesn't take as long to recover. And so I think if you start by investing in yourself, and I'm going to, again, take this a different direction, starts with prioritizing sleep. We need sleep. I found very early on that when I was getting an adequate amount of sleep, 8 hours, I was much more sharp over a long period of time. That could mean for some of us cutting out like alcohol, tobacco, fast food. If you do that in conjunction with sleep, for me, I felt way better. I feel better now than I did 10, 12, even 15 years ago. But I've also invested in my health by exercising. I exercise on average 5 times a day. I'd like to exercise 7. And I've gotten to
Five
the
times a
point
day?
where,
That's impressive.
yeah, I'm sorry, 5 times a week, 5 times a week, not a day. In my mind, maybe I'm
Yeah.
that good. But and thanks for calling me out on that one. I find that if I go more than a couple days without exercising, I'm just not the same. I have now an urge, a desire to continue what I've created. And that is I feel good about myself. I feel good physically. It's because of the work I've put in. My mind is better for it. And when you feel that way, it is a sense of accomplishment. So if you start to feel better, it is not uncommon. You're going to perform better at work. You're going to have better relationships. Your mind will be in a better place. So you're not just taking care of yourself physically, but mentally, which everybody should focus on mental health or mental clarity. There's a lot of ways you can do that. Exercise is one way for me to get to a good place. Next thing I'm going to talk about is goals. Everyone talks about it. It sounds very cliche. I know. But start by giving yourself some micro goals that you can accomplish over the next quarter. Or maybe it's the upcoming quarter, because as we record this, we're in almost in December. It's hard to create a quarterly goal, but maybe you start by accomplishing something before the end of the year. And then you zoom out and ask yourself, what are the macro goals I want to achieve over the next year, maybe the next 6 months? Totally up to you. Establish one or two. 3 or 4 is probably too many. Give yourself something where you can reward yourself, whether it's buying a new vehicle, a vacation, whatever that thing might be. And a lot of us, for guys like you and me, Dustin, it was investing in a planner, or in our case, creating the hustle planner that was able to get us to a point to say, I need to keep my personal mission statement. I need to keep my personal goals in front of me. I need to write this stuff all these things down every single day, because if I don't, it's out of sight, out of mind. And if you're constantly reminding yourself, these are the priorities for this week, these are the priorities for this month, this is what I've accomplished this quarter, it seems like you've 100x your chances of achieving those things. And so ask yourself, just reverse engineer. It's not just what I want. We all know what we want, but what do I need to do to prepare myself to be able to get to that position? And obviously, reading books and showing up early, those things are all a given. Anybody can do that. But what can you do that a lot of people are not willing to do to put yourself in the position to set yourself up for long-term success?
Yeah, you bet. And so what's interesting about goal setting, right? To your point, you're reverse engineering what are the actual behaviors I need to do to accomplish whatever my goal is, right? And it's crazy how simple it actually is when you go through that process, but how we talk about all the time. It's, 80% of the world doesn't even have goals, right? And then of the 20% that do, 80% of them never write it down, right? And then 80% of that small group doesn't tie it into behaviors, right? And so on and so forth. And so like, how do you become that 1%, right? Like that just crushes goals time and time again. It's not nearly as complex as people think it is, right? It's really just how do you kind of reverse engineer it? How are you reverse engineering it? How are you prioritizing it? And then, taking that action towards it, right? I mean, just writing it down and not taking action, that doesn't do it any good either. But, the other thing to add to that, if you have this mindset of what would be the behaviors, what behaviors and the quantity of that behavior that would make it basically impossible for me not to achieve my goal. I think a lot of times in today's world, everyone is so focused on how do I do the least amount possible to achieve the greatest outcome? And don't get me wrong, I believe in 80-20. I believe in, understanding where you're putting your efforts and prioritization and planning and goal setting. All of that is true. But I think a lot of times it's taken too far. It's like, okay, well, this is the one thing I need to do. I wonder if I could just do it a little bit. Well, sometimes you just got to do the thing, right?
Yeah.
I think exercise is always the easiest because people can see, inputs and outputs the most direct. I mean, there is an element of you just have to you have to eat differently, and you have to move more, and you have to do it all the time.
All the time.
And if you just do that, then actually the outcome is incredibly predictable. But do people want to do the behavior? And so like if somebody wants to accomplish some fitness goal, it is very easy to define what it takes to do that. That doesn't mean it's easy to do, because you have other priorities in life, you have other constraints, you have doesn't mean it's easy to do, but it's very easy to set the path. And then if you think about what that behavior is and just think through what would make it basically impossible for me not to get that next level, get that next leadership, hit that sales target, hit that fitness goal. Like when you think of it that way, it actually becomes so crystal clear, but like, well, this would be hard, but it would basically guarantee the result.
Yeah. That's a really great perspective. And I think more people need to think about, what can I do now for the next step rather than the big step. So maybe you have these huge goals of wanting to become a CEO of the company 10, 15, 20 years from now. I actually don't think that those are the things you should be thinking about, because over 5 years, you could be working for a different company. You could be in a different industry. You could be living in a different state or a different country even. And so for me, it's more about, like you said, what can I do to make myself irreplaceable or make it almost impossible that I don't achieve this next goal or I don't achieve this next promotion? And then zoom out as maybe what's the next one after that? Because how many promotions can one get in a year? How far can one advance in one calendar year? Raise the bar high enough to where it's a little ambitious, it's a little uncomfortable, but low enough to where there is a probability you will achieve it. And that's going to be different for everybody. I recommend for folks who are earlier in their career, give yourself a little bit of pressure, not too much, because as a lot of people I know, they set goals they never achieved because they were wildly unrealistic. People could say, oh yeah, well, I'm going to make $1 million. Well, you don't go from making $50,000 a year to $1 million a year. That rarely ever happens in the history of life, but maybe it's 50 to 150 and 150 to 250. You get the point. So think about a good next step is what? I think it simplify things. Sometimes these things are only as difficult as we make them.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. The biggest and most important step is really just the next step.
Couldn't agree more.
So take that one and don't, again, it's not that don't plan out, don't think about, don't, take any step that is random, right? I mean, that's where planning helps, but there's a point where we just have to take action. Nothing happens until we take action. And I think there are some people that don't take action without planning. Obviously those that, if you had a choice between taking action without planning or not taking action without planning would still be better, right? You're going to take more missteps. You're going to go more left and right, and you might end up in different spots, but taking action is always going to be better than inaction.
Yeah. And if you don't take action, you're going to be left with regret. That's the unfortunate truth. Well, thanks again for listening to another episode. We'll catch you on the flip side. Peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.